The
You
October
need
light
to
fell
understand
across
the
the
gravity of
42nd
this
floor of
situation,
Harrington
and I
Tower,
won't
like a
tolerate any
judgment
more
rendered in gold
excuses.
and amber slamming through floor-to-ceiling windows that cost more than most Americans earned in a decade. 12 leather chairs surrounded a mahogany conference table, polished to such perfection that the executives seated around it could see their own reflections staring back, a reminder, perhaps intentional, that in this room every person faced themselves as much as they faced each other. Garrett Callahan stood at the far end of that table holding a presentation folder he had assembled over 3 sleepless nights. His charcoal shirt was clean but not new, his khaki pants pressed but showing wear at the knees. Gray had crept into his temples sometime in the past 2 years, and though he was only 42, he carried himself with the careful economy of a man who had learned to measure his energy for the battles that mattered. 11 executives occupied 11 chairs. The 12th sat empty. No one had thought to invite him to sit. He had been speaking for nearly 2 minutes about currency risk models in the Eastern European portfolio, his voice steady and professional despite the pulse hammering against his ribs. This was his first direct presentation to senior leadership in 2 years, a chance his supervisor had granted only because no one else was available, delivered with the implicit understanding that Garrett should be grateful for even this much. And if we examine the currency risk modeling for our positions in Poland and the Czech Republic, there's an unusual correlation with Victoria Harrington raised her hand, not a gesture requesting permission to interrupt. This was the motion of absolute authority, a palm lifted with languid indifference, as if hearing another syllable would constitute an unacceptable waste of her finite attention. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan. That will be enough." 5 words, no explanation, no follow-up question, just complete dismissal as though he were a PowerPoint file closed mid-sentence because it had ceased to be relevant. Garrett felt the impact like a slap, though his expression betrayed nothing. This was a skill he had cultivated over 2 years, the ability to maintain perfect composure while something inside him fractured. Like a baseball player watching an umpire call a strike on a pitch 6 inches outside the zone, he knew that protest would only make things worse. He remembered sitting at this table, not at the end invisible and standing, but in the center right beside the CFO. He remembered how people leaned forward when he spoke, nodding, taking notes, hanging on every syllable of his analysis. That was 11 years ago. It might as well have been a different lifetime. Now they did not even glance in his direction as he gathered his materials and walked toward the door. Through the glass wall of the conference room, Garrett caught sight of a small figure perched on a cream-colored leather sofa in the waiting area. Lily sat with her feet dangling above the floor, swinging gently in that unconscious rhythm children maintain when they are bored but patient. A coloring book lay open on her lap, and beside her rested a box of crayons that Garrett always kept in his work bag. When the glass door swung open, Lily looked up. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with dark brown hair that fell past her shoulders and gray eyes that matched her father's exactly. She did not understand what happened in boardrooms, the numbers, the charts, the financial terminology that adults used like weapons, but she understood body language. She saw how her father's shoulders had tightened, how his jaw had set, how his steps came faster than usual. "Daddy, are we going home now?" Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going home." Lily said nothing more. She simply took his hand and pressed the coloring book into his palm, a gift meant to comfort, though she could not have explained why he needed comforting. Garrett looked down at the crayon drawing on the open page, a house with a yellow sun and 2 stick figures holding hands, and something in his chest constricted. Inside the conference room, Victoria Harrington had already turned her attention to the next slide in the Meridian presentation. But for a fraction of a moment, her gaze drifted toward the glass wall and the scene unfolding beyond it. The gray-haired man walking away, the small girl rising to meet him, their hands finding each other with the easy intimacy of a practiced ritual. She did not know why she noticed. Hundreds of employees passed through this floor every week, and she paid attention to none of them. But something about the image, the gentleness in the man's posture as he accepted the coloring book, the way the child reached for her father without hesitation, held her attention for a beat longer than it should have. A question formed in Victoria's mind, shapeless and unnamed. Then Marcus Caldwell advanced to the next slide, and she returned to the business at hand. 11 years earlier, in the summer of 2008, Garrett Callahan had occupied a corner office on the 38th floor of this same building. He was 31 years old then, and the screens arrayed before him displayed lines of code and data visualizations that perhaps a few dozen people on the planet could fully interpret. Atlas, the advanced trading logic and analysis system, was his creation. 7 years of his life had gone into building it, transforming a theoretical framework from his graduate thesis into the most sophisticated real-time data analysis platform in the industry. The system could process millions of data points per second, identifying patterns invisible to human perception, predicting market movements with an accuracy that had made competitors desperate to recruit him away. They had offered triple his salary. He had refused every time. Garrett loved the elegance of numbers, the way they revealed truths that words could only obscure. Building Atlas had been like constructing a racing car from salvage parts. Everyone else saw scrap metal, but he saw a machine waiting to be assembled. In August of 2007, 11 months before Lehman Brothers would collapse and the global financial system would teeter on the edge of oblivion, Atlas began generating warning signals that Garrett could not ignore. The algorithms had detected unusual correlations between the subprime mortgage market and broader macroeconomic indicators. The data suggested a bubble forming massive, precarious, and inevitable in its eventual rupture. He spent 3 months verifying his findings, running the analysis again and again, because the stakes were too high for error. Thousands of jobs depended on the accuracy of his conclusions. The reputation he had built over nearly a decade hung in the balance. In November of 2007, he presented his findings to William Harrington Jr., Victoria's father and the man who had built the company into a financial powerhouse. William Jr. was a demanding man, but he knew how to listen. He sat in silence for 45 minutes while Garrett walked him through the analysis, never interrupting, his expression revealing nothing. When Garrett finished with his prediction that major institutions heavily exposed to subprime mortgages would collapse within 12 months, William Jr. asked only one question. "Do you believe what you just told me, Mr. Callahan?" "It's not about what I believe, sir. The data believes it. I'm just the one reading it." William Jr. nodded. Within a week, Harrington Capital began quietly exiting all positions connected to the subprime market. September 2008, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. Bear Stearns was sold in a fire sale. AIG required emergency government bailout. Global markets plummeted. Harrington Capital. The company did not merely survive, it thrived. While competitors hemorrhaged billions, the firm absorbed only minimal losses and quickly capitalized on opportunities to acquire distressed assets at pennies on the dollar. Garrett Callahan became a legend. Senior partners competed to have him on their teams. Financial journalists requested interviews. His name appeared in case studies at Harvard Business School. And Victoria Harrington, then 30 years old and working her way up through the strategy division, heard about the analyst named Callahan who had saved her family's company from catastrophe. She did not know his face, but she remembered his name. She would not remember why that mattered until much later. The winter of 2017 arrived in Chicago with the particular cruelty of seasons that refused to acknowledge human suffering. Snow fell thick beyond the windows of room 412 in Northwestern Memorial Hospital's oncology ward, blanketing the city in white, while inside Claire Callahan lay dying. She had been diagnosed with a stage 3 pancreatic cancer 4 months earlier, one of the most lethal forms of the disease, with survival rates that made doctors speak in euphemisms rather than statistics. The physicians had estimated 6 months. Reality granted her 4. Garrett sat beside her bed, his hand wrapped around hers, feeling the bones beneath skin that had grown paper thin. Her dark brown hair, the same shade she had passed to their daughter, had fallen out weeks ago from chemotherapy. But her eyes remained clear, and when she looked at him, he still saw the woman he had met at a technology conference in San Francisco 8 years before. In the corner of the room, Lily slept curled in an oversized armchair, clutching a worn teddy bear. She was 5 years old, too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to sense that something was terribly wrong. She had stopped asking when Mommy was coming home. Claire's voice emerged as a whisper, each word requiring visible effort. "I worry about her." "We'll be fine. Lily and I will be fine. You'll work too much. You'll forget how to live." Her breath came in shallow gasps. "Don't let her grow up lonely, Garrett. Don't be like my father was with me." She paused, gathering strength for what she needed to say. "I don't need you to be successful. I need you to be happy. She needs you to be present. Garrett nodded, his throat too constricted for words. Claire's gaze drifted toward their sleeping daughter. She's so much like you. Stubborn, smart, kind. Another pause. Tell her about me so she doesn't forget. Every day. The promise emerged hoarse and broken. I'll tell her every day. Claire Donovan Callahan died at 3:47 in the morning while snow continued falling beyond the window. Lily did not wake. 2 weeks after the funeral, Garrett sat in the Human Resources Director's office with two options spread before him on the desk. Option 1, continue as senior quantitative analyst. Salary of $320,000 per year plus bonus. Requirements, minimum 10 hours daily in office international travel, 6 to 8 weeks annually on-call availability around the clock. Option 2, transfer to data verification specialist. Salary of $85,000 per year, no bonus. Fixed hours from 8 to 5, no travel, no on-call obligations. The HR director looked at him as though he had lost his mind. Mr. Callahan, you understand, this represents a significant step backward. Your career. I have a 5-year-old daughter who just lost her mother. His voice remained level despite everything churning beneath. She wakes up every night crying for her. She needs me there when the nightmares come. She needs me to read bedtime stories. She needs me to be waiting when she comes home from school. He paused, meeting the director's eyes. There's no career more important than that. The Lincoln Park apartment was sold within a month. Garrett and Lily moved to Rogers Park, a working-class neighborhood on the city's north side, where the rent was a third of what they had paid before. The radiator clanked through winter nights, and the neighbors played music too loud on weekends. But the building had a small playground in the courtyard where Lily could run while Garrett watched from their second-floor window. He learned to cook from YouTube tutorials: spaghetti with tomato sauce pancakes for Saturday mornings, grilled cheese sandwiches that Lily declared her favorite food in the world. He learned to braid hair from instructional videos, though his early attempts were so lopsided that Lily had to pretend she liked them anyway. He learned to be both father and mother, knowing all the while that he could never truly replace what she had lost. The savings account from his years as a legend gradually depleted. Garrett counted every dollar, calculated every expense: rent, groceries, Lily's school supplies, health insurance premiums that seemed designed to bankrupt anyone without corporate backing. Some nights he woke at 3 in the morning staring at spreadsheets on his laptop, wondering how to stretch the budget for one more month. But Lily was healing. She slept through the night more often than not. She made friends at school. She began to laugh again. Not the forced laughs of those first terrible months, but genuine laughter from a child who was starting to believe the world could still be safe. For Garrett, that was everything. The basement level of Harrington Tower was not technically underground, but it felt like a different world from the glass and chrome elegance 42 floors above. Located on the ground floor with no windows and no natural light, the data verification department occupied a long corridor lined with approximately 20 cubicles, most of which stood empty by evening, because no one wanted to remain a moment longer than necessary. Fluorescent lights hummed with a constant electrical drone. The carpet was worn thin, unchanged since the 1990s. Beige walls bore no artwork or decoration. This was where the company placed the work no one wanted to do and the employees no one wanted to see. Garrett's cubicle occupied the far end of the corridor near the fire exit. The space was small but meticulously organized, a habit from the days when Claire was still alive and would tease him about his compulsive neatness. On the partition wall, he had placed exactly 3 items: a photograph of Lily on her first day of school, a crayon drawing she had made of the two of them at the park, and a dried leaf pressed between plastic sheets from Millennium Park, where he had proposed to Claire 9 years before. In the corner sat a small folding table he had brought from home. This was Lily's workspace on afternoons when Garrett had to stay late, where she did her homework while he finished his reports. Data verification specialist was a dead-end job in the eyes of most employees. The work consisted of checking numbers in financial reports before they ascended to the executive floors, finding typos, formula errors, discrepancies between data sources. Repetitive, uncreative, unacknowledged. But Garrett approached it differently. While his colleagues performed surface-level reviews and waited for 5 o'clock, he actually read the data, immersing himself in the patterns the way a mechanic listens to an engine for sounds that do not belong. He still loved the elegance of numbers, the way they could reveal truths that words deliberately concealed. More importantly, he remembered every line of code he had ever written. The Atlas system still ran on the original framework he had designed. Layers of new code had been added by programmers who came and went over the years, but the skeleton remained his. He knew the system the way a builder knows a house he constructed with his own hands. He knew the pipes hidden behind walls, the joists beneath floors, the corners and crevices invisible to anyone who had not put them there. This knowledge would matter soon, though Garrett did not yet understand how. When he had resigned from senior analyst in 2017, the IT department had revoked most of his access privileges according to standard protocol. But Douglas Pemberton, the head of IT security, had made an exception, read-only access to the Atlas core system justified under the category of maintenance support. This was not an oversight. Douglas understood that Atlas was a legacy system of extraordinary complexity, and Garrett was the only person alive who truly grasped how it functioned at the deepest level. Keeping a backdoor open for him was an insurance policy hopefully never needed, but irreplaceable if the system ever encountered a critical failure. Like keeping the plumber's number who built your house, Douglas had explained to his team. You hope you'll never have to call, but when you do, nothing else will work. Marcus Caldwell, the CFO, knew nothing about this arrangement. He did not manage its infrastructure, and Douglas had no reason to report such a minor technical detail up the chain. That access would eventually allow Garrett to see what Marcus desperately wanted no one to find. 3 weeks after the boardroom dismissal on a Tuesday evening in late October, the Harrington Tower had emptied of workers 2 hours prior. The cleaning crew would not arrive until 9. In the space between the buildings settled into a silence deep enough that the soft hum of air conditioning from the upper floors became audible, even in the basement. Garrett sat at his desk cross-referencing data on Eastern European investment positions. Lily occupied the folding table beside him, working on her math homework with the focused intensity she brought to every task. The fluorescent light cast a pale glow over her dark hair. "Daddy, what's 11 times 12? He swiveled his chair to face her, allowing a small smile. "What do you think it is?" Lily bit her lip and placed her tongue against the inside of her cheek, a gesture she had inherited from Claire, one that made Garrett's heart clench every time he saw it. Beneath the table where she thought he could not see, she counted on her fingers. 132. "That's right. You're getting good at this. You don't need me anymore." She grinned with visible pride and turned back to her worksheet. Garrett watched her for a moment longer before returning to his screen. These small moments, a math problem solved, a smile earned, justified every sacrifice. 42 floors above them, Victoria Harrington was leaving her office later than intended. A conference call with London had run long, and she had texted her driver that she would find her own way home. She wanted to walk through the building, a habit she had developed since becoming CEO. In these quiet hours, when the offices stood empty and no one demanded anything from her, she could feel the weight of the empire she commanded without needing to maintain any mask. The elevator deposited her on the ground floor. She told herself she was checking temperature logs in the server room, a task easily delegated to a T, but offering a plausible excuse for wandering. She was walking through the data verification corridor when she noticed light spilling from a cubicle at the far end. Victoria stopped in the shadows far enough to remain unseen, but close enough to observe. She recognized the man from the boardroom 3 weeks earlier, the one she had silenced mid-sentence. He was leaning toward a small girl, pointing at a notebook with infinite patience. The child asked about a math problem, and instead of giving the answer, he guided her to find it herself. Victoria did not understand why she was standing here. She ran a company managing $120 billion in assets. She did not have time to watch a low-level employee help his daughter with homework. But something held her in place, the peace in that small pool of light, the connection between father and child, the complete presence the man gave to a 7-year-old's arithmetic struggle. She thought about her own childhood. Her father had never sat with her like this. Her mother had not either, too occupied with society galas and charity events. Victoria had grown up with tutors and nannies in large rooms filled with expensive toys but empty of anyone who stayed. That little girl had a father who showed up. Victoria never had. Garrett glanced up from his screen, some instinct alerting him to observation. His eyes found Victoria in the corridor's darkness, and even at this distance, she saw recognition cross his features. He knew exactly who she was. But his reaction was not what she expected from employees. No panic, no scramble to explain why his daughter was present, no obsequious deference or visible fear. He simply nodded, a small, unhurried gesture, not submission to power, just acknowledgement between two human beings. Then he turned back to Lily as though Victoria were no more significant than any other person who might wander past. She stood there a moment longer, unsure why her throat had tightened. Then she pivoted and walked briskly toward the elevator, not looking back. Throughout the drive from the tower to her empty penthouse in Gold Coast, Victoria could not stop thinking about that nod. She was accustomed to flattery, to fear, to ambition poorly concealed behind every smile directed her way. But that nod contained none of those things, only calm acceptance. The man wanted nothing from her. He possessed something she did not have. This realization unsettled her in ways she could not name. 3 days later, on a Friday evening, Lily was spending the weekend at her grandmother's house. Eleanor Callahan had offered to take her granddaughter so Garrett could rest. The rest was not what he had in mind. A number had been haunting him for 72 hours, a small discrepancy that most people would dismiss as irrelevant. But Garrett had never been most people. The Meridian acquisition. $3 billion to purchase controlling interest in a network of manufacturing plants across Poland, the Czech Republic, and Romania. Victoria had mentioned it during the meeting where she silenced him. The projections promised 17% growth in the first year's sustainable profitability for a decade. Every number looked beautiful. Every chart pointed upward. But when Garrett cross-referenced the Meridian figures with historical performance data from similar companies in the region, he found an anomaly. A discrepancy of 2.3% in baseline revenue calculations. To most analysts, 2.3% would register as noise, a rounding error perhaps, or a minor methodology difference between data sources. Garrett understood better. He comprehended compound effects the way a seasoned mechanic understood the implications of a strange rattle in an otherwise smooth engine. A 2.3% discrepancy in baseline numbers when projected forward through multiple years with compounding variables did not remain 2.3%. It became 5% in year 2, 8% in year 3, 15% in year 5. By the end of the decade, the deviation could reach 40 or 50%. What that meant in practical terms, if the projections promised 17% growth, reality might deliver 10%, or 5%, or negative returns. Garrett spent 3 hours that Friday night tracing the discrepancy's origin. He compared Meridian report figures against raw data from original sources, publicly filed financial statements, World Bank and IMF databases, European Union trade statistics. What he found made his stomach clench. The baseline figures in the Meridian model did not match reality. Someone had adjusted them not through a single dramatic alteration that might catch attention, but through hundreds of small modifications scattered throughout the model. Tweaks so subtle that they would escape notice unless someone understood algorithmic modeling at an expert level. Someone capable of making these changes without detection, and someone even more capable to recognize them. Garrett sat alone in the darkness of his cubicle, the computer screen casting blue light across his face. If he was right, the Meridian acquisition was not an opportunity. It was a trap, one that would devour billions of dollars and potentially destroy a company that 3 generations of the Harrington family had built. But he also thought about the boardroom 3 weeks earlier, Victoria's raised hand, the way she had dismissed him without allowing him to finish a sentence. If they had not wanted to listen when he lacked evidence, would they want to listen now that he had some? His gaze drifted to Lily's photograph on the partition wall. He thought about his promise to Claire to be present to maintain stability, to prioritize their daughter above everything else. Pursuing this could unravel the fragile equilibrium he had constructed over 2 years. It could cost him his job, his income, the modest security he had managed to preserve for Lily. But he also thought about the thousands of other employees at Harrington Capital, the millions of clients who trusted the company with their retirement savings, their children's college funds, their futures. If Meridian collapsed as spectacularly as the data suggested it would, how many people would lose their jobs? How many families would suffer? Garrett knew he could not live with himself if he stayed silent. That was not who he was. That was not the example he wanted to set for his daughter. He had told Claire in those final moments that he would be the kind of father she wanted him to be. A man who showed up. a man who did what was right even when it cost him. The truth was all he had ever known how to offer. It had cost him plenty over the years, but at least he could still face his own reflection without flinching. He saved his preliminary findings to a secure folder, then began the deeper investigation that would consume the following week. Someone had manipulated the data. Garrett needed to know who and why. And though he did not yet realize it, the answer would implicate one of the most powerful men in the company, a man whose influence extended so far that challenging him might prove not merely career-ending, but dangerous. The fluorescent lights hummed above him. Outside Chicago's late October chill had begun its descent toward winter. Garrett poured himself another cup of coffee from the ancient machine in the break room and returned to his desk. He had a system to crack open, and he was perhaps the only person alive who knew how. The week that followed moved in a blur of late nights and careful documentation. After Lily went to bed each evening, Garrett returned to his laptop and the labyrinthine architecture of Atlam, the system he had designed nearly 2 decades earlier, now operating with layers of additional code that subsequent developers had grafted onto his original framework. Finding the source of the data manipulation required understanding not just what had changed, but how anyone could have made changes without leaving traces in the system logs. Atlas had comprehensive logging protocols. Garrett had built them in 2003 as a security measure. Every modification to the database generated a record timestamp user identification source IP address. This was the forensic trail that anyone altering data should have left behind. The problem: the modifications to Meridian projections showed no clear log entries. They appeared as though the original data had always been this way: no alterations, no fingerprints. Only one explanation made sense. Someone had bypassed the logging system, entirely accessing the database directly at a layer beneath the application where logs were generated. A backdoor. Garrett spent 2 nights searching for it. He knew his own system intimately, but someone had added new code during the 18 months since his resignation code he needed to locate and understand. On Wednesday at 11:47 p.m., reviewing an outdated configuration file, he found it. A database connection string that did not belong to any module in the official documentation. He traced it to a hidden stored procedure in the database, one without a name in the standard schema created 18 months prior with the highest permission levels. The backdoor. Someone had created a secret entrance allowing direct data modification without generating logs. And based on the timestamp, this backdoor had been established at precisely the moment when major deals began entering the planning phase, including Meridian. Identifying the perpetrator required tracing access logs for the creation moment. Garrett found an IP address belonging to the company's VPN network, the secure connection used by senior executives when working remotely. He cross-referenced with HR records, showing who possessed VPN access. A short list: CEO, CFO, CTO, and a handful of senior directors. Authentication logs narrowed it further. On the night the backdoor was created, only one person had logged in through VPN. Marcus Caldwell, Chief Financial Officer. The man William Harrington Jr. had trusted like a son. The man Victoria considered a mentor. The man whose word carried more weight in this company than perhaps anyone except the CEO herself. Garrett sat motionless for a long time, processing what the data had revealed. He traced all modifications made through the back door. The results exceeded his worst expectations. Not just Meridian. The back door had been used to adjust projections for 3 other deals during the past 18 months. All had been approved and were currently in execution phases. Total exposure, if all falsified projections became reality, more than $4 billion. Meridian at $3 billion was the largest and most dangerous. The target factories were over-leveraged. Profit margins had been inflated through accounting manipulation. Currency exposure: euro against Polish zloty, Czech, Koruna, Romanian leu had been drastically underestimated. Garrett calculated potential losses $2 billion or more in the first quarter after closing. With compounding damage every month thereafter, the CFO of Harrington Capital was cooking the books. And if the Meridian deal went through as scheduled, it could destroy everything. Garrett thought about what would happen if he reported these findings. Marcus Caldwell had spent 20 years building influence within this company. He had relationships at every level, loyalties carefully cultivated, debts owed and collected. Garrett had what a low-level position, a reputation that had faded into obscurity. A 7-year-old daughter who depended on him for everything. He could stay silent, let the deal proceed, let others bear the consequences, protect the fragile stability he had constructed for Lily. But he also remembered what Claire had said in her final hours, that she needed him to be happy, that Lily needed him to be present. And Garrett knew he could not be happy, could not look at his daughter without shame if he possessed this knowledge and did nothing with it. That was not the man he wanted to be. That was not the father he had promised Claire he would become. He began compiling evidence, saving copies to multiple secure locations outside the company's reach. He prepared a formal report documenting everything in the back door, the modifications, the trail leading to Marcus Caldwell, the potential exposure of over $4 billion. When the report was complete, it ran 47 pages. Garrett submitted it through the internal review channel, the company's official whistleblower system, on a Monday morning in early November. He followed every protocol, documented every step, retained copies of everything. Then he waited. He expected weeks to pass before any response. The internal review system was designed to be slow, ensuring that allegations received thorough investigation before action. But the summons arrived after only 72 hours. A meeting scheduled for 4:00 p.m. on Friday, a time slot chosen. Garrett recognized immediately with deliberate intent. End of the week, end of the day, office nearly empty, location conference room 38B, a small meeting room rather than the large spaces typically used for internal review hearings. Garrett understood the message before he walked through the door. This was not an investigation. This was an ambush. And as he made arrangements for Eleanor to keep Lily through the weekend, he understood that the week ahead would determine not just his career, but the kind of man his daughter would see when she looked at her father. Some truths demanded to be spoken regardless of cost. Some principles could not be sacrificed even for safety. Garrett Callahan had never been able to live any other way. Conference room 38B occupied a corner of the 38th floor that most employees never visited. The space was deliberately modest, 10 chairs, maximum capacity. No windows, a projection screen that had not been updated since 2012. This was where difficult conversations happened, the kind that did not merit the grandeur of executive boardrooms, but required enough formality to intimidate whoever sat on the wrong side of the table. Garrett arrived at 3:55 p.m. on that Friday in mid-November, escorted from his basement cubicle by 2 security officers who flanked him through the elevator and corridor without speaking. They were not arresting him. The message, however, was unmistakable. 6 people already occupied seats when he entered. Marcus Caldwell sat at the head of the table, silver hair, immaculately styled gray suit pressed to perfection. His smile never reached his eyes, a professional courtesy so practiced it had become indistinguishable from contempt. Patricia Lawson, general counsel, occupied the chair to Marcus's right. Her expression revealed nothing, the cultivated neutrality of someone whose job required withholding judgment until all evidence had been weighed. A legal pad and pen waited before her. The remaining 4 seats held the head of risk management, the head of compliance, and 2 board representatives whose names Garrett recognized from organizational charts, but had never encountered in person. Victoria Harrington was not present. Garrett noted her absence with the precision of someone cataloging evidence. Either the CEO did not know this meeting was occurring, or she had been deliberately excluded. Neither possibility offered comfort. No chair had been provided for him. He stood at the opposite end from Marcus, the length of the table stretching between them like a demarcation line. Marcus did not waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Callahan, we have reviewed your submission. The allegations you've made are not merely unfounded, they are potentially defamatory and could expose this company to significant legal liability." The data speaks for itself. Garrett kept his voice level despite the pulse hammering against his ribs. "If you'll allow me to walk you through the technical analysis, the data has already been reviewed by our senior analytics team." Marcus cut through his words like a blade. "They found no irregularities of the kind you describe. What they did find was a pattern of unauthorized access to systems above your clearance level." The strategy crystallized in Garrett's mind with brutal clarity. Marcus was flipping the narrative. Instead of investigating the allegations, they would investigate the person who made them, turning the whistleblower into the accused. "I have access because I helped build those systems nearly 2 decades ago. Your senior analytics team missed a backdoor that has been manipulating baseline figures for 18 months. The Meridian projections are constructed on falsified numbers. If that deal closes, the exposure could exceed $2 billion in the first quarter alone. Silence descended. Patricia Lawson wrote something on her legal pad. Marcus's expression hardened, the professional smile evaporating. You are a data verification specialist, Mr. Callahan. Level 2. You are not qualified to interpret strategic financial modeling. And frankly, this grandiose delusion that you've uncovered some vast conspiracy is precisely the kind of behavior that concerns us. I designed the system those models run on. The words hung in the air. Around the table, Garrett detected a subtle shift, glances exchanged, postures adjusting. Some of them were remembering who he had been before the basement, before the voluntary demotion, before he became invisible. One of the board representatives leaned forward, a man in his 60s with the polished aggression of someone accustomed to corporate warfare. Is that a threat, Mr. Callahan? Are you implying that your previous role gives you some kind of leverage here? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating fact. Someone modified the analytics system to hide the true financial picture of the Meridian acquisition. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented evidence with timestamps, access logs, and a clear trail. The room erupted. Voices overlapped, accusations, denials, counter-accusations, layering into chaos. The head of compliance spoke about disgruntled employees seeking attention. The head of risk management raised questions about mental stability. Marcus rose from his chair, face flushed with controlled fury. Enough, Mr. Callahan. Effective immediately, you are removed from all projects related to Meridian. Your access to Level 3 systems is revoked. You will submit to a performance review next month. And if I hear one more word about this matter from you, through any channel, internal or external, we will proceed with immediate termination for cause. Is that clear? Garrett surveyed the 6 faces arrayed against him. Closed, hostile, united in their determination to bury what he had found. Perfectly clear. The security officers escorted him out, not to the building exit, but back to his cubicle, where he was required to gather his personal belongings under their supervision. Lily's photograph, her crayon drawing, the pressed leaf from Millennium Park. He placed each item into a cardboard box while strangers watched, ensuring he took nothing that belonged to the company. 3 floors above, in her corner office, Victoria Harrington was reading a transcript. She had not known about the meeting. Marcus had assured her it was a minor personnel matter, nothing requiring her attention. But Victoria made it her business to know what happened within her company, and Patricia Lawson, following standard legal protocol, had forwarded the official record. Victoria read it twice, her brow furrowing at details she had never encountered. Specific technical claims, data points described with precision that did not match the ramblings of an unstable employee. And one phrase that stopped her cold: I designed the system those models run on. She remembered the name Garrett Callahan, the analyst who had saved the company in 2008. The man she had silenced in a boardroom meeting less than a month ago, cutting him off mid-sentence because she had more important things to consider. Her hand moved toward the phone to call Marcus, then stopped. If Callahan was right, if even a fraction of what he claimed was true, then someone in her senior leadership had been lying to her for a very long time. And until she knew who and why, she could not trust anyone. Victoria closed the transcript and began for the first time to question everything she had been told about the Meridian acquisition. The weekend passed in a haze of false normalcy. Garrett picked Lily up from Eleanor's house on Saturday morning, and they spent the day at the Museum of Science and Industry, wandering through exhibits about space exploration and weather patterns. Lily asked endless questions. Why do stars twinkle? How do clouds form? What makes thunder so loud? And Garrett answered each one with patience. He did not feel grateful for the distraction from thoughts he could not share with a 7-year-old. That night, after she fell asleep clutching the worn teddy bear that had once belonged to Claire Garrett, sat alone in the kitchen of their Rogers Park apartment. The arithmetic was brutally simple. Marcus Caldwell commanded 2 decades of institutional influence relationships at every level of the company, loyalties accumulated through years of careful cultivation. Garrett possessed a basement cubicle, a reputation most employees had forgotten, and a daughter who needed stability more than she needed a father tilted at windmills. He had tried to do the right thing. He had followed protocol, documented everything submitted through official channels. The result: threatened termination, security escorts, his name added to whatever internal blacklist existed for employees who caused problems. Lily needed consistency. She had already lost her mother. She could not afford to lose anything else. The small routines they had built homework at the folding table, grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner, bedtime stories about dragons and princesses. These were the foundations of her healing. Garrett could not jeopardize them for a battle he had no realistic chance of winning. He made his decision in the silence of that kitchen, with November wind rattling the old windows and the radiator clanking its irregular rhythm. He would stop, not because he believed he was wrong, but because the cost of being right had become too high. The evidence he had compiled remained saved in secure locations outside company reach. He would not destroy it because some truths deserve preservation, even when they could not be acted upon. But he would not pursue this further. He would accept whatever punishment Marcus deemed appropriate, keep his head down, and focus on the only thing that truly mattered. The world would have to save itself this time. Sunday morning arrived gray and cold. Lily sat at the kitchen table eating cereal, her feet swinging above the floor in that unconscious rhythm she maintained whenever she was thinking. "Daddy, are you still worried about work stuff?" The question caught him off guard. "Why do you ask? You look a la yesterday, like when our car broke down and you stayed up all night looking at papers." He lowered himself into the chair beside her, marveling as always at how much she observed despite her age. "I'm not worried anymore, sweetheart. Some things are just outside my control. I'm going to focus on what matters, and that's you." Lily nodded, accepting this with the simple trust children extend to parents they believe in. Then she asked a question that would echo in his mind for days. "Daddy, if someone at school does something bad and I know about it, should I tell the teacher?" "What made you think of that?" "There's a boy who takes other kids' stuff. I saw him do it, but I don't know if I should say anything." Garrett looked at his daughter, those gray eyes waiting for guidance for the moral framework that parents were supposed to provide. He thought about what he had just decided, about silence chosen for safety's sake. "What do you think you should do?" Lily considered carefully, her small face serious. "I think if I don't say anything, he'll keep taking stuff. And the kids who lose their things will be some." He pulled her into an embrace, unable to find words. She hugged him back, unaware of how profoundly her simple logic had unsettled something he had tried to settle. 3 weeks later, in the first week of December, the Eastern European markets opened with a cascade of red numbers that sent tremors through every trading floor in Chicago. Regulatory announcements from the European Union that no one at Harrington Capital had anticipated. Currency fluctuations rippling through Poland, the Czech Republic, and Romania, destabilizing precisely the sectors that the Meridian acquisition targeted. Manufacturing indices plummeting, investment confidence evaporating. The projections that had promised 17% growth revealed themselves as fantasy. Marcus Caldwell spent the morning in damage control mode, issuing reassuring statements to investors, convening emergency calls with board members, insisting that the volatility was temporary, a market correction that would resolve within weeks. But the bleeding continued. By noon, exposure estimates had doubled from initial calculations. By market close, preliminary figures showed losses approaching $800 million, and the Meridian deal had not even closed yet. Final signatures were scheduled for the following week. In her 42nd floor office, Victoria reviewed reports with growing alarm. The numbers in front of her bore no resemblance to the presentations she had received over the past several months. The gap between what she had been told and what was actually happening was not subtle. This was a chasm wide enough to swallow careers, fortunes, and the company that 3 generations of her family had built. She thought about the meeting in late October, Garrett Callahan standing at the end of the boardroom table trying to explain something about currency risk models before she raised her hand and silenced him. She thought about the disciplinary hearing transcript, about the specific technical claims Patricia Lawson had documented. She thought about the nod in the basement corridor, the man who wanted nothing from her, the man who had tried to tell the truth and been threatened with termination for his trouble. Victoria locked her office door. She diverted her calls. And for the next 4 hours, she did something she had never done before. She questioned the information her most trusted advisor had provided. She pulled access logs for the analytic systems, cross-referencing with the timeline Callahan had described in his report. She was not a technical expert. The intricacies of database architecture lay beyond her training, but she understood patterns. She understood when numbers told stories that words were trying to hide. And at the end of those 4 hours, she found it. The back door, The modifications? A trail of digital fingerprints leading directly to credentials assigned to Marcus Caldwell. Victoria sat motionless in the darkness of her office as Chicago's winter evening descended outside the windows. 20 years. Marcus had been with the company for 20 years. Her father had trusted him implicitly, had treated him almost like a son, had relied on his judgment in moments when the family's entire legacy hung in the balance. And he had been falsifying data, manipulating projections, constructing an elaborate deception that had very nearly destroyed everything. The financial damage was severe but potentially survivable if she acted quickly. The Meridian deal could still be stopped. The other compromised acquisitions could be unwound, though the costs would be staggering. What struck her most forcefully, however, was not the balance sheet implications. It was the memory of Garrett Callahan, the quiet dignity of a man who had been silenced, dismissed, and threatened, but who had not been defeated. She had wronged him. She had dismissed his warnings without listening. She had allowed him to be dragged into a disciplinary hearing while she reviewed quarterly projections in comfortable ignorance. And he had been right about everything. The weight of that realization settled over Victoria like a physical burden. She had spent her entire career building a reputation for competence, for seeing what others missed, for being the kind of leader her father had trained her to become. And she had failed in the most fundamental way possible. She had trusted without verifying, had dismissed without investigating, had allowed loyalty to substitute for evidence. Now she needed help. And there was only one person who understood the full scope of what Marcus had done, one person who had built the system that made the deception possible, and who knew where every hidden passage led. She needed Garrett Callahan, and she had no idea whether he would be willing to help her after everything she had allowed to happen. The basement corridor was empty when Victoria arrived the following morning. Most data verification employees had not yet reached their desks. The fluorescent lights hummed over unoccupied cubicles, casting their pale glow across worn carpet and beige walls. She found him at the far end near the fire exit. He was reviewing verification reports, the menial work he had been assigned as punishment after the disciplinary hearing, his back straight in the ergonomic chair that had seen better decades. When he heard her footsteps, he turned. Recognition flickered across his features, followed by surprise that he quickly suppressed into careful neutrality. "Mr. Callahan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Honesty is the only currency I trade in, though as you're probably aware, the exchange rate hasn't been favorable lately." Victoria absorbed the rebuke without flinching. She had earned it. "The report you submitted, the discrepancies, the back door." She paused, the words difficult to force out. "You were right about everything." "I know. Losses are approaching $1 billion. If the deal closes, we could be looking at double or triple that figure. I need your help, not just to understand what went wrong, but to stop the damage from spreading. You know the system better than anyone. You're the only one who can trace the full extent of what's been done." Garrett leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she could not read. "A month ago, I was removed from the project and threatened with termination for telling the truth. I wasn't in that meeting. But you didn't stop it." "No." The admission came harder than she had expected. "I was given partial information by people I trusted, and I didn't question it. That's not an excuse, it's an explanation of how I failed." Something shifted between them. Garrett had expected denial deflection, the institutional defensiveness that powerful people deployed when confronted with their mistakes. He had not expected raw acknowledgement of fault. "If I help," he said slowly, measuring each word, "I need assurances. The truth comes out, all of it. No one gets protected because of their title or their history with this company." "Agreed. And my daughter never sees the inside of another disciplinary hearing. Whatever happens, she's not used as leverage." "Agreed." Garrett rose from his chair, closing the distance between them until they stood face to face, the basement-level data specialist and the CEO of a $120 billion company meeting as something closer to equals than either had anticipated. "One more thing. When this is over, you need to ask yourself why it happened. Not just who did it, but why your company created conditions where this kind of fraud could flourish for 18 months without anyone noticing." Victoria nodded slowly. "That's fair." They shook hands. The gesture was not absolution. Too much had happened for that, but it was a beginning. "We have 3 days before the emergency board meeting," Victoria said. I need you to walk me through everything. And I need to understand it well enough to explain it to 12 people who will be looking for any reason to doubt what I'm telling them. Then we should start now. They moved to a secure conference room on the 31st floor away from the executive suites, where Marcus might notice unusual activity. Victoria had the space swept for recording devices, then locked the door behind them. For the next 72 hours, they would reconstruct the full architecture of Marcus Caldwell's deception. And in the process, two people from vastly different worlds would begin to understand each other in ways neither had anticipated. The first night of their collaboration stretched past midnight. Files spread across the conference table, printouts of code modifications, access logs, financial projections marked with discrepancies. Garrett guided Victoria through each layer of the fraud, translating technical complexity into language a non-specialist could grasp. Think of it like someone tampering with the odometer before selling a car, he explained. The vehicle looks like it's been driven less than it actually has, but the engine wear tells the real story. Marcus changed the numbers that everyone sees, the projections, the growth estimates, but he couldn't change the underlying reality those numbers were supposed to represent. Victoria nodded, making notes. And the back door let him make changes without leaving fingerprints. Exactly. The system logs every modification, but the back door accesses the database at a level beneath the logging function. It's like breaking into a house through a basement window that doesn't have an alarm. How did you find it? I wrote the original blueprints. Every architect remembers where the hidden rooms are. They work through the night, stopping only for coffee and the occasional walk to clear their heads. The full scope of the deception gradually revealed itself, not just Meridian, but 3 other acquisitions over 18 months. Total exposure, if left unaddressed, more than $4 billion. Meridian was the worst. Factories over-leveraged beyond recovery, profit margins inflated through accounting tricks that would collapse under scrutiny, currency risks that the falsified models had dramatically understated. Why? Victoria asked at one point, exhaustion fraying the edges of her composure. He doesn't need money. He's been wealthy for years. What could possibly justify this? Garrett had thought about that question during the week since his discovery. I don't think it was about money. I think it was about legacy. Meridian was supposed to be his masterpiece, the deal that defined his career, that got his name mentioned in the same breath as the Harringtons when people talked about this company's history. And when the real numbers didn't support it, he convinced himself they were wrong, that the market would adjust, that his projections would eventually prove accurate if he just had enough time. Garrett paused. That's the danger of spending too long in positions of power. You start believing you can bend reality to match your expectations. Victoria absorbed this in silence. She thought about her own assumptions, her own willingness to accept what Marcus told her without verification. How close had she come to the same kind of blindness? Near 2 in the morning, Garrett's phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor Lilly. Asleep. No problems. Sweet dreams to you both. Victoria noticed him checking the message. Your daughter, Mum. My mother's watching her for a few days. She thinks I'm working on something important. A faint smile crossed his face. She's not wrong. How old is she? Your daughter. 7. Her name is Lily. The one I saw with you into the basement that night. Garrett looked at her with surprise. You remember that? I remember everything about that night. Victoria's voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with financial fraud. You nodded at me, like I was just another person walking past. Do you know how rare that is? People don't look at me that way. They look at what I represent, the money, the power, what I might do for them or to them. You looked at me like none of that mattered. It didn't. I was helping my daughter with math homework. Everything else was just background noise. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I've never had someone look at me that way. My whole life, people have wanted something. My father included. The confession surprised her. She had not intended to reveal so much. But something about the late hour, the closed room, the shared purpose of their work had lowered defenses she normally maintained without conscious effort. Garrett did not respond immediately. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than before. After Claire died, I spent a lot of time thinking about what really mattered. Career status, money, I'd chased all of it for years. And in the end, none of it helped when she was lying in that hospital bed. None of it mattered when Lily was asking why Mommy wasn't coming home. What did matter? Being present, showing up, doing what's right even when it costs you. He met her eyes. That's why I'm here. Not because I owe this company anything, not because I want my old job back. I'm here because my daughter asked me a question about whether to tell the teacher when she saw someone doing something wrong, and I couldn't answer her while I was choosing silence for myself. Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of kinship with this man she had so thoroughly misjudged. They came from different worlds, occupied opposite ends of every hierarchy that mattered. But in this moment, they shared something more fundamental than class or position. They both understood what it meant to carry a responsibility that could not be delegated. The second night brought them closer to assembling a presentation that could withstand board scrutiny. Victoria had been a quick study, asking precise questions and grasping technical concepts faster than Garrett had expected. By Wednesday evening, she could explain the backdoor mechanism, trace the modification timeline, and articulate the potential losses in language that would resonate with the financially sophisticated audience she would face. They took a break around 10 o'clock, standing by the window that overlooked the Chicago skyline. The city glittered below them, towers of light rising against a black December sky. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria's voice was soft, tentative, in a way he had not heard before. "Of course. Why did you do this? After how we treated you, after how I treated you, you could have let the company burn. No one would have blamed you. The evidence would have come out eventually, and you could have watched from a safe distance while everything collapsed." Garrett considered the question. "I almost did. After the disciplinary hearing, I decided to stop. Let it go. Focus on Lily and forget about trying to save people who didn't want to be saved." "What changed?" "My daughter asked me a question." He turned from the window to face her. She wanted to know what she should do if she saw a kid at school taking things that didn't belong to him. A simple question, the kind of moral puzzle that seems obvious when you're 7. "What did you tell her?" "I couldn't tell her anything, because I was sitting there knowing what I knew, choosing silence because it was safer. How could I tell her to do the right thing when I wasn't willing to do it myself?" Victoria said nothing, but her expression carried an understanding that words would have diminished. "Claire, my wife, she said something before she died. She told me not to let Lily grow up lonely, and she wasn't just talking about being physically present. She meant being the kind of father worth looking up to. Living in a way that would make my daughter proud when she was old enough to understand what I'd chosen. And this is what you chose. This is who I am. I've never been able to look away from the truth even when looking at it hurt. That's probably why I was good at my job back when I had one that mattered. And it's definitely why I ended up in the basement." Victoria turned back toward the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "My father talked about legacy, responsibility, not failing the family name, but never about being the kind of person worth admiring. Never about doing right because it was right. Maybe that's why you're standing here at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night trying to fix something you could have covered up." She considered this. Maybe it is. The moment stretched between them, not romantic, not yet anything beyond mutual recognition, but carrying the weight of two people discovering that their unlikely alliance rested on foundations more substantial than shared necessity. Victoria's phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. "Board meeting is in 36 hours. We should get back to work. There's one more thing we need to prepare for." "What's that?" "Marcus will fight. He's not going to sit quietly while you accuse him of fraud in front of the entire board. He'll attack, try to discredit me, question your judgment, suggest that you've been manipulated by a disgruntled employee with a grudge." Victoria's jaw tightened. "Let him try. You need to be ready. The evidence is irrefutable if you present it correctly. But if you let him shift the narrative, make it about personalities instead of data, the board might hesitate. And hesitation is all he needs to start covering tracks we haven't found yet. What do you suggest? Lead with the numbers. Don't let anyone in that room forget that this isn't about me or you or Marcus. It's about $4 billion in exposure and a company that will cease to exist in its current form if the wrong decision gets made." Victoria nodded slowly. "You should have been running a division, not verifying data in a basement. I should have been reading bedtime stories to my daughter. Everything else was a detour." She met his eyes, and for a moment the CEO of Harrington Capital and the level 2 data specialist existed simply as two human beings who had found unexpected common ground. "Let's finish this," she said. "I have a board to convince and a CFO to fire." The night before the board meeting, Garrett called Lily from the conference room where he and Victoria had been working for 3 days. "Daddy, are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just lots of important stuff at work." "Is it about the thing I asked you about, the boy who takes stuff?" He smiled despite the exhaustion weighing on him. "Something like that, but bigger." "Are you going to tell the teacher?" "I am." "Good." The satisfaction in her voice was unmistakable. "I did too. I told Mrs. Patterson about Tommy, and she talked to him, and he gave back Amira's pencil case." Garrett's heart clenched at the simple courage of a 7-year-old doing what he had almost been too afraid to do. "I'm proud of you, Lily. That was a brave thing to do." "Grandma says being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared." "Your grandmother is a wise woman." "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart. I love you. Come home soon." "Okay, I will." "I promise. I love you too." He set the phone down and stared out the window at the city lights. Tomorrow would determine whether his choice to speak truth had been wisdom or folly. Whether the years of accumulated influence Marcus Caldwell commanded would overwhelm the evidence Garrett had assembled. Whether Victoria's transformation from dismissive executive to determined ally would prove genuine or just another performance in the theater of corporate politics. But whatever happened, he would be able to look his daughter in the eye. He would be able to answer her questions about right and wrong without hypocrisy weighing on his conscience. Some principles could not be sacrificed for safety. Some truths demanded witness regardless of cost. There is no career more important than being the kind of father your daughter can believe in. The thought rose unbidden, carrying the weight of everything Claire had asked him to become. Garrett returned to the conference table, and the documents spread across its surface. He had 12 hours to prepare for the most consequential meeting of his life. And somewhere in this building, Marcus Caldwell was sleeping soundly, confident, no doubt that his decades of accumulated power would shield him from consequences. That confidence was about to prove fatally misplaced. The boardroom on the 42nd floor had never felt smaller than it did on that Monday morning in mid-December. All 12 members of the board of directors occupied their customary seats, arranged around the mahogany table in configurations that reflected decades of accumulated relationships, allies clustered together, rivals maintaining careful distance, the uncommitted positioned where they could observe without committing. Marcus Caldwell sat to the right of the CEO's chair, the position he had occupied for 15 years. His silver hair gleamed under the recessed lighting, his gray suit immaculate, his expression radiating the serene confidence of a man who had weathered countless corporate storms and emerged unscathed from each. He held a leather portfolio containing his own prepared remarks, a preemptive defense no doubt against whatever accusations he anticipated. When Victoria entered with Garrett Callahan at her side, Marcus's composure flickered. The surprise lasted only a fraction of a second before professional control reasserted itself, but Garrett caught the tell a tightening around the eyes, a subtle shift in posture that betrayed calculations rapidly adjusting. Victoria did not take her seat. She moved to the head of the table and remained standing, a choice that altered the room's dynamics in ways the assembled executives registered immediately. This was not a routine quarterly review. This was something else entirely. 18 months ago, someone installed unauthorized access into our primary analytics system. Her voice carried the authority of 3 generations of Harrington leadership, steady and cold as Lake Michigan in January. That access has been used to manipulate projections for multiple acquisitions, including Meridian. The fraud was designed to conceal risk while accelerating deals that would never have been approved under accurate analysis. Silence claimed the room. Around the table, expressions shifted from curiosity to alarm to calculation as board members processed implications that extended far beyond this single meeting. Marcus's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. His face remained composed, but his knuckles had gone white. The individual responsible used private access credentials to create a backdoor that bypassed our logging systems. Victoria's gaze swept the assembled faces before settling on her CFO. Those credentials traced directly to the account assigned to Marcus Caldwell. The eruption was immediate. Marcus surged to his feet, face flushing crimson. This is outrageous. Who authorized this investigation? Who? His eyes locked onto Garrett with undisguised fury. You're behind this. A disgruntled former employee manipulating the CEO for some pathetic revenge fantasy. The evidence isn't fabricated. Garrett's voice remained level, cutting through the chaos with the precision of a surgical instrument. It's been hiding in your own systems for over a year. You assume no one would think to look. I designed this architecture. I know every corner where secrets can hide. I've given 20 years to this company. Marcus wheeled toward Victoria, his composure shattering. I was loyal to your family before you were born. I stood beside your father through crises that would have destroyed lesser men. And you're going to believe this basement clerk over me? I believe the access logs. Victoria did not raise her voice, but the steel in it silenced the room more effectively than shouting could have. I believe the code modifications with timestamps that correspond exactly to the timeline Mr. Callahan documented. I believe the paper trail linking every falsified projection to one person. She stepped closer to Marcus, close enough that he had to look up at her from where he stood. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided your ambition was worth more than the truth. Security will escort you from the building. Regulatory authorities have already been notified. Absolute silence descended. Marcus looked around the table, searching for allies who might intervene. Board members who owed him favors accumulated over 2 decades of careful relationship management. One by one, they turned away. Walter Thornton was first to speak, the independent board member who had questioned Meridian projections months ago, only to be dismissed by Marcus with patronizing assurances about market dynamics he supposedly did not understand. I support the CEO's decision. We need a full investigation and complete transparency with regulators. Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Heads nodded. The coalition that had protected Marcus Caldwell for 20 years dissolved in the span of seconds. When security officers entered to escort him out, Marcus paused at the door. His face had gone gray, the flush of anger replaced by something that looked almost like bewilderment, the expression of a man who had genuinely believed himself untouchable and was only now confronting the reality that he was not. Victoria waited until the door closed behind him before addressing the remaining board members. I also bear responsibility for what happened. I trusted without verifying. I dismissed warnings that should have been heard. She turned toward Garrett, who had remained standing near the window throughout the confrontation. Mr. Callahan tried to alert us to this situation 2 months ago. Instead of listening, we threatened to fire him. She paused, allowing the weight of that admission to settle over the room. Effective immediately, I am restructuring our oversight processes and taking a 30% reduction in my personal compensation for the next year. This company will operate with transparency, or it will not operate under my leadership. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, damage assessments, legal strategies, communications planning, but the crucial moment had passed. Marcus Caldwell was finished, and in his place stood an unlikely alliance between the CEO of a financial empire and the data specialist she had dismissed with a wave of her hand just weeks before. The weeks that followed brought consequences that fell unevenly across the organization. Federal investigators arrived within 48 hours of the board meeting, subpoenaing records and interviewing employees throughout the company's senior ranks. Marcus faced charges that accumulated like snowfall: securities, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, falsification of financial documents. His attorneys negotiated, delayed, and maneuvered, but the evidence Garrett had assembled proved devastatingly comprehensive. If convicted on all counts, Marcus Caldwell faced up to 25 years in federal prison. Victoria's swift intervention had prevented the Meridian deal from closing, avoiding the catastrophic losses that would have followed. But 3 other acquisitions, already in execution phases when the fraud was discovered, could not be unwound without significant damage. The company absorbed losses approaching $1.2 billion in the first quarter of 2020 alone. The stock price dropped 22% following public disclosure. Layoffs became unavoidable. Approximately 200 employees lost their jobs in the restructuring that followed. Shareholders filed lawsuits. Financial journalists wrote articles examining how such deception could have persisted for so long without detection. But Victoria did not retreat behind corporate lawyers and carefully crafted statements. She appeared on CNBC, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal. She admitted failures without equivocation, outlined recovery plans with specific milestones, committed to transparency measures that went beyond regulatory requirements. The narrative that emerged was not about scandal, but about accountability, a CEO who had discovered fraud within her own ranks and chosen honesty over self-protection. Recovery took nearly 2 years. The stock price stabilized by late 2020 and began climbing in 2021, though it never quite reached the heights of the pre-crisis period, settling around 70% of its former peak. Scars remain visible in the reduced headcount, the canceled expansion plans, the wariness that now characterized every major decision. Like a car that's been in an accident, Victoria told a reporter during one of her rare interviews, you can repair it, you can make it run again, but it will never be exactly what it was before, and maybe it shouldn't be. The damage teaches you to be more careful. Garrett's role in exposing the fraud remained largely absent from press coverage. He had insisted on anonymity, and the journalist covering the story preferred more dramatic narratives than a basement-level data specialist who had noticed a 2.3% discrepancy. Within the company, however, his contribution was known and acknowledged. Victoria ensured that internal communications credited him by name, making clear to every employee who had first raised the alarm. Frank Malone, his former colleague from the quantitative analysis days, began stopping by his cubicle regularly, conversations that started with work-related questions and gradually evolved into something resembling friendship. Douglas Pemberton, the IT security head whose decision to preserve Garrett's legacy access had inadvertently enabled the discovery, personally thanked him for proving that the insurance policy had been worth maintaining. The basement corridor felt different now, not physically transformed. The fluorescent lights still hummed. The carpet remained worn. The walls were still painted institutional beige, but the atmosphere had shifted. Colleagues who had walked past without glancing now nodded greetings. Supervisors who had treated him as barely competent found themselves reassigned to other departments. Garrett kept his cubicle near the fire exit, his 3 photographs still mounted on the partition wall. He had been offered relocation to a higher floor, an office with windows, but he declined. The basement was where he belonged. It was where he had built something worth protecting. 2 months after the board meeting, Victoria summoned him to her office on the 42nd floor. The space reflected her personality, organized to the point of severity, with minimal decoration beyond a single photograph that had appeared recently on her desk. A landscape she had taken during a hiking trip years ago, she explained when Garrett asked, before the weight of the company had fully settled onto her shoulders. I want to offer you a position. She slid a folder across her desk toward him. Senior Vice President of Risk Analytics. Corner office team of 20 analysts reporting to you, salary commensurate with the responsibilities. Garrett opened the folder and reviewed the offer. The numbers were impressive, nearly $300,000 annually, plus bonus structures that could push the total significantly higher. Benefits that would transform his and Lily's financial security overnight. A title that would restore him to the professional prominence he had voluntarily abandoned. He closed the folder and set it back on her desk. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in climbing back up that ladder. Victoria's expression revealed surprise she did not quite manage to conceal. You understand what you'd be giving up. I understand exactly. I spent too many years chasing that kind of success, and I know where it leads. I have a daughter who needs me present, not traveling, not working until midnight, not so consumed by career that I forget to be her father. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But I will consult. Part-time on projects where you need someone who will tell you the truth even when it's uncomfortable. On my terms, flexible hours that let me pick Lily up from school dinner at home most nights, weekends, that actually belong to my family. Victoria considered this for a long moment. The arrangement was unconventional. It violated every principle of corporate hierarchy she had been trained to enforce. But she was learning slowly and painfully that some of those principles had failed her when she needed them most. Agreed. They shook hands across the desk, a gesture that had become their ritual, marking transitions neither fully understood. Can I ask you something? Garrett held her gaze. Why did you offer me the senior position you knew I'd probably refuse? I wanted you to know that I see what you gave up. Not just now what you sacrificed years ago when you stepped back to be there for your daughter. Most people in this company would kill for the opportunity I just offered you. The fact that you can walk away from it without hesitation She trailed off, searching for words. It tells me something about what matters to you, something I'm still trying to learn for myself. What's that? That success means nothing if you lose yourself getting there. Garrett nodded slowly. Claire used to say something similar. She told me she didn't need me to be successful. She needed me to be happy. Did you understand what she meant when she said it? Not then. I thought I did, but I was still climbing, still chasing the next achievement. It took losing her and almost losing myself afterward to really hear what she was trying to tell me. Victoria turned toward the window, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. I've spent my entire adult life trying to live up to expectations that were set before I was old enough to question them. And now I'm wondering if those expectations were ever the right ones. If maybe the measuring stick was wrong all along. The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerability from a woman who had built her entire identity around projecting invulnerability. Garrett understood what it cost her to say such things aloud. It's not too late to build something different. His voice was gentle. That's one thing I've learned. It's never too late to start over as long as you're honest about what you actually want. Victoria turned back from the window. For a moment, the CEO mask slipped entirely, and he glimpsed the person beneath someone who had achieved everything society defined as success and discovered it was not enough. Thank you, Mr. Callahan, for everything, not just the fraud for seeing me as something other than the name on the door. Garrett, if we're going to work together, you might as well use my actual name. A small smile crossed her face, the first genuine one he had seen from her. Garrett, then, and I suppose you should call me Victoria. Spring arrived in Chicago with its characteristic unpredictability, snow squalls one week, warm sunshine the next. The lakefront trees began their slow transformation from winter gray to tentative green, and the city emerged from hibernation with the collective relief of survivors who had endured another brutal season. By April of 2020, Harrington Capital had weathered the worst of the scandal's aftermath. The stock price had stabilized. Investor confidence was rebuilding. The company would never be exactly what it had been before, but it would survive, transformed, chastened, perhaps stronger for having confronted its own failures. Victoria had developed a habit of visiting the basement floor during regular business hours. No longer the furtive nighttime excursions of months past, these were open acknowledgments of an alliance that had ceased to require hiding. She and Garrett met for coffee, discussed risk assessments for major decisions, and gradually found themselves talking about things that had nothing to do with financial modeling. Books they had read, places they had traveled when they were younger and time seemed infinite. The winding paths that had brought two people from opposite ends of every hierarchy to this improbable partnership. The conversations were careful at first, professional courtesies extended slightly beyond professional necessity. But as weeks passed, the boundaries between colleague and something more began to blur in ways neither explicitly acknowledged. Lily met Victoria on a Saturday afternoon in late April. Eleanor had taken her granddaughter to a birthday party, but the event ended early and Garrett brought his daughter to the office where he and Victoria were reviewing quarterly projections. The 7-year-old surveyed the 42nd floor with the unimpressed pragmatism of childhood. Your office is really big, she informed Victoria, but you don't have any pictures on your walls. Don't you get lonely up here by yourself? Victoria had no ready answer. The question cut through corporate pretense with the precision only children could achieve, exposing truths that adults preferred not to examine. The following week, a framed photograph appeared on Victoria's desk, a landscape she had taken years ago, before the weight of the company had become her permanent companion. She did not explain its sudden appearance, and Garrett did not ask. When Lily visited again the next month, she noticed the photograph immediately. That's pretty. Did you take it? I did, a long time ago when I used to go hiking. You should go hiking again. Daddy says being outside helps when you feel sad. Victoria glanced at Garrett, who offered a small shrug that conveyed both apology and amusement. His daughter had inherited her mother's directness and her father's observational acuity, a combination that left little room for adult evasions. Maybe I will, Victoria told the child. Would you like to see the view from up here? On a clear day, you can see all the way to Indiana. Lily considered this offer with visible seriousness, weighing factors only she understood. Okay, but then can we go get ice cream? Daddy promised. I think that can be arranged. Later, after ice cream and after Eleanor arrived to collect her granddaughter for the evening, Victoria and Garrett stood alone in his basement cubicle. The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal drone, but the space felt different now, less like exile and more like choice. "She's remarkable," Victoria observed. "Lily, she sees things most people miss. She gets that from her mother. And her courage. Where does that come from?" Garrett smiled. "Claire would have said stubbornness. It's the Callahan family curse. None of us know when to stop pushing." "It's not a curse. It saved this company. It almost got me fired." "But it didn't, and now—" Victoria paused, searching for words that seemed to elude her. "Now I'm not sure what to call what we are. Colleagues doesn't seem a sufficient. Friends feels presumptuous. We don't have to call it anything. We can just let it be what it is." She nodded slowly, accepting the ambiguity he offered. "I should go. Early meeting tomorrow." "Victoria," he caught her arm as she turned toward the door, a gesture that surprised them both. "What you've accomplished these past months, rebuilding investor confidence, implementing real reforms that matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her eyes met his, and for a moment the distance between their worlds seemed to collapse entirely. "Thank you, Garrett, for seeing something in me worth believing in. I'm just telling the truth. It's all I know how to do." She left without another word, but the air in the cubicle felt charged with possibilities neither was ready to name. The summer months brought a gradual thaw in the careful distance they had maintained. Coffee meetings extended into lunch conversations. Lunch conversations occasionally continued into evening hours, when the building emptied and they could speak without the perpetual awareness of being observed. They talked about Claire, her laugh, her stubbornness, the way she had challenged Garrett to become more than he thought he could be. They talked about Victoria's mother killed in a car accident when Victoria was 12, leaving behind a void that no amount of professional success had ever filled. They discovered shared losses, parallel griefs, the particular loneliness of people who had learned to function without the anchors they had once depended upon. "I don't know what I'm looking for," Victoria admitted one evening in August, when the summer heat had driven them to a rooftop bar overlooking the river. "I spent so long defining success by external metrics, revenue growth, market share, industry recognition. Now those things feel hollow, like I was playing a game without understanding the rules." "What would you want if you could have anything?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Connection, something real, someone who sees me as a person rather than a position." A pause. Is that pathetic, the CEO of a billion-dollar company admitting she's lonely? It's honest. There's nothing pathetic about honesty. "You've never been afraid of it, have you?" Hate the truth. "I've been afraid of plenty of things. Losing Claire, not being enough for Lily, failing the people I care about." Garrett turned his glass in his hands, watching the condensation trail down its surface. "But lying about what I see, pretending not to notice what's right in front of me that I can't do. It's not courage, it's just how I'm built. I wish I were built that way." "You're learning. That's what matters." The words hung between them, weighted with meanings neither was quite ready to articulate. On a Saturday afternoon in early September, Victoria appeared at Garrett's Rogers Park apartment building, but without the business attire he had always seen her wear. Jeans and a light sweater, her hair loose instead of pulled back in its customary severe style. She looked almost uncertain, an emotion he had never associated with her before. "Lily's at a birthday party," he told her, stepping aside to let her enter. "She won't be back for a few hours." "I know, I wanted to talk to you about something other than work." They sat in the small living room, surrounded by evidence of a life constructed entirely around a child artwork covering the refrigerator, books stacked on every horizontal surface, a jigsaw puzzle half completed on the coffee table. "These past months," Victoria began, then stopped, visibly struggling with words that did not come naturally. "You've become important to me, not just professionally. I don't know how to say this without it sounding like a corporate presentation, but I want you to understand that what I feel is real." Garrett said nothing, waiting. "I'm not asking for anything. I don't have expectations or demands. I just wanted to be honest with you, the way you've always been honest with me. Whatever happens from here or doesn't happen, I needed you to know." The vulnerability in her voice stripped away every barrier she had constructed over a lifetime. This was not the CEO of Harrington Capital. This was a woman who had built walls around herself for so long that she had forgotten how to dismantle them. Victoria. Her name felt different when spoken in this context, more intimate, more weighted with possibility. I've spent 3 years convincing myself that part of my life was over, that losing Claire meant closing off whatever capacity I had for connection. And now I'm not sure what I think. Lily comes first always. Any future I build has to have her at the center. I wouldn't want it any other way. And it would have to be slow, careful. I can't rush into something that might fall apart and leave her dealing with another loss. Slow is fine. I've spent my whole life rushing toward the next milestone. Maybe it's time to find out what happens when I stop. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. She let him. I don't know what this is, he told her quietly. I don't know where it goes or what it becomes or how we make it work with everything else in our lives. But I want to find out. Victoria's eyes glistened in the afternoon light filtering through the apartment's small windows. That's enough. That's more than I dared to hope for. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, two people from vastly different worlds discovering that the distance between them had somehow become bridgeable. When Lily returned from the birthday party that evening, she found Victoria still present, helping her father prepare dinner in the tiny apartment kitchen. The 7-year-old surveyed the scene with the careful assessment she brought to all new situations, processing information, drawing conclusions, deciding whether this development aligned with her expectations. Are you staying for dinner? Lily asked Victoria. I already ate, but I could stay for a while if that's okay with you. Lily considered this with visible seriousness. You could help with the puzzle. Daddy is terrible at the edge pieces. He always tries to force ones that don't fit. Hey, Garrett protested with mock offense. It's true, Daddy. You know it's true. Victoria caught his eye over Lily's head, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I think I can manage edge pieces. They settled around the coffee table, working on a jigsaw landscape of mountains and sky. Lily chattered about the birthday party, the cake, the games, the present she had chosen for her friend, while Victoria listened with an attention that seemed to genuinely interest her. Garrett watched them together, his daughter slowly healing from losses no child should have to endure, and the woman who was teaching him that second chances might be real after all. The puzzle pieces clicked into place one by one, revealing an image of somewhere none of them had ever been. This evening was ordinary, unremarkable. The kind of night that happened in homes across the country without anyone recognizing its significance. But for Garrett, watching his daughter laugh at something Victoria said, it felt like the beginning of something he had stopped believing possible. People who do the right thing when no one wants to hear it, those are the brave ones. That kind of courage matters more than anything. The thought rose unbidden, carrying the weight of everything he had learned in the past year. About integrity, about sacrifice, about what it meant to be the kind of person worth believing in. The puzzle depicted mountains rising against an endless sky, pieced together slowly by 3 pairs of hands, building something none of them could have constructed alone. Outside, Chicago's September evening settled into comfortable darkness. Stars emerged above the city's light pollution, faint but persistent, the way truths remain visible to those willing to look. Lily yawned, and Garrett announced that bedtime had arrived despite her predictable protests. Victoria rose to leave, pausing at the door while Lily ran to fetch something from her room. The child returned with a crayon drawing, 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a yellow sun, with a third figure standing nearby. This is for you, she told Victoria. That's you, and that's me and Daddy, so you don't get lonely in your big office. Victoria accepted the drawing with an expression Garrett had never seen on her face, something between wonder and grief and hope intermingled. Thank you, Lily. I'll put it right next to my desk where I can see it every day. Promise. I promise. Lily hugged her a brief, fierce embrace that contained all the uncomplicated trust children offer before they learn to guard themselves against disappointment. Then she ran toward her bedroom, leaving the 2 adults standing in the doorway of the small apartment that had somehow become the center of everything. She's extraordinary, Victoria said softly. She's her mother's daughter. Garrett paused. And mine. The stubbornness, anyway. The best parts of both of you. They stood in comfortable silence, neither feeling compelled to fill the space with unnecessary words. The evening had contained something neither could fully articulate, a recognition that whatever was growing between them had room to include a 7-year-old girl who had already lost too much. I should go. Victoria's voice carried reluctance she did not try to hide. Come back, whenever you want. I will. She turned toward the elevator, then looked back. Garrett, thank you for giving me a chance to be part of something real. You earned it. Everything that matters, you earned. The elevator doors closed between them, but the distance felt temporary now. A pause rather than an ending. Garrett returned to the apartment where his daughter waited for her bedtime story. He sat on the edge of her bed as he had every night since Claire died and opened the book they were reading together, a story about a princess who rescued herself. Daddy, Lily's voice was drowsy, already drifting toward sleep. Yes, sweetheart. I like Victoria. She listens when I talk. Most grown-ups don't really listen. She's learning how. Sometimes it takes people a while to learn the important things. Did you have to learn too? Garrett considered the question with the seriousness his daughter deserved. I'm still learning. Every day. Lily smiled, the peaceful smile of a child who felt safe enough to trust the world. That's okay. Mom said nobody's perfect. She said we just have to keep trying. Your mother was the smartest person I ever knew. I know. Lily's eyes closed, her breathing already deepening toward sleep. Tell her I love her, okay, when you talk to her in your head. Garrett's throat tightened. I will, sweetheart. I tell her every day. He sat beside his sleeping daughter for a long time, watching her breathe, thinking about everything that had brought them to this moment. The losses that had nearly broken him. The choice to speak truth when silence would have been safer. The unexpected alliance that had grown into something neither he nor Victoria had anticipated. The apartment was quiet around him, filled with the artifacts of a life rebuilt from wreckage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to be the kind of father his daughter deserved. But tonight, in this small room with the radiator clanking softly and his daughter dreaming beside him, Garrett Callahan felt something he had almost forgotten was possible. Peace. The kind that came from knowing you had done what was right, regardless of what it cost. And hope. The fragile, persistent hope that the future might contain more than just survival, that it might actually hold the things worth surviving for. He kissed Lily's forehead, turned off the lamp, and walked to the window overlooking the city that had tested him and nearly broken him, and somehow delivered him to this place of unexpected grace. The people who matter most aren't the ones with titles or money. They're the ones who show up, who tell the truth, who stay. The thought felt like a conclusion and a beginning simultaneously. Outside Chicago glittered beneath a canopy of stars, indifferent and eternal, while somewhere in the darkness, Victoria Harrington drove home with a crayon drawing on the seat beside her and the strange, unfamiliar sensation that she might finally be learning what mattered. And in a small apartment in Rogers Park, a father who had chosen integrity over safety fell asleep in a chair beside his daughter's bed, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, he would face it as the man he had promised to become. The man Claire had always believed he could be. The man Lily needed him to be. The man he had finally learned to recognize in the mirror.